Good morning, fellow classmates. So the question is commonly asked, especially now that we're in college, what sports do you play? And I'm always that odd one out that says, yeah, I'm a dancer. And people look at me like I'm crazy, but I'm just here shaking my head because I've been a dancer for over 14 years now, and I have knowledge in styles such as ballet, tap, jazz, modern, contemporary, hip-hop, point, lyrical, tumbling, character salsa, ballroom, and improvising. So due to my experience and knowledge in the world of dance, I declare that dance meets the requirements to be named a sport based off the criteria that is specified in the definition of a sport. The definition of a sport is an activity involving physical exertion and skill in which an individual or team competes against another or other. So I have three distinct qualities that provide eligibility for dance to be declared as a sport based on the definition that I just read. The first one is that dancers are demanded to go through athletic training. The second one is that dancers are involved in daily rigorous practices. And then the third one is that dancers participate in competitions. And all of these are just like any other sport or any other athlete. Most people would argue that dance isn't a sport because it isn't in the Olympics, or it's not seen, like dance competitions aren't seen on sports networks. So they're like, well, it's not a sport because I never see it. But dance should be in the Olympics, just like the other 30 sports the International Olympic Committee recognizes. According to Olympic officials, in order to qualify as a sport in the Olympics, it must be widely practiced by men in at least 75 countries and on 4 continents, and by women in at least 40 countries and on 3 continents. So dancers get like the bad side of the stick because not a lot of men are flexible, and not a lot of men would want to put themselves through the pain of doing the splits. Plus, men don't want to admit that dancing is actually really difficult and painful, so that's why it is not in the Olympics. Cheerleading is considered a sport, but that isn't in the Olympics either. And I don't see how people can say that cheerleading is a sport and dance isn't. It makes me die a little bit inside. So dance has always been recognized as an art form, a celebration of life, movement, and artistic expression. In this day and age, it often takes a backseat to popular sports and games such as football, basketball, and soccer. However, the exclusion of dance from the generally accepted list of traditional sports has been a debate between dancers and other athletes for some time. Why are dancers, with their rigorous physical training and quest for perfection in execution and technique, not considered to be of the same caliber as other athletes? Who are others to say that dance cannot be considered true athletes as well as artists? Why is dance not recognized both as an art and as a sport? The way I combine dance into an art and a sport is by this phrase: it takes an athlete to move, but an artist to dance. There's a difference between recreational and professional dancing. Like, you could kick a soccer ball around just for fun, and that's like recreation soccer, but it's still a sport. And just like you can dance for fun, like you know how to do the Dougie, you're not like, that's not doing a sport, that's just like for recreation. But there's a difference between like professional dancing. So my claim is that dance is a sport. So let's look at the definition of a sport. It first says that it's an activity involving physical exertion and skill. That takes me to my first criteria of how dance is a sport, because dancers are demanded to go through athletic training just as every other athlete. The definition of an athlete is a person trained or gifted in exercises or contests involving physical agility, stamina, or strength. A participant in a sport, exercise, and game requiring physical skill. So, since dancers go through athletic training, there's classes, and you can find these classes at studios. And what we do, we stretch, and we have a lot of core exercises and muscle building and cardiovascular conditioning. The classes allow dancers to learn the dance moves, practice the proper forms, and perfect the technique. Teachers create fitness goals, such as they would for other athletes, for dancers to improve in strength, agility, flexibility, coordination, endurance, stamina, balance, grace, fluidity, and control. There are thousands of dance terms to be learned, and it takes a lot of skill, just like as it would with any other sport. Also, there's a lot of injuries in dance, and that's why the dance therapy exists, and there's therapists to help dancers. But these problems are generally treated as sports injuries by sports medicine doctors in the same way that an injured soccer player may be dealt with. Like, for example, I have arthritis in my hip because I've been a dancer, and I'm not only an artist, I'm actually an athlete because I'm like putting my body in so much force. So on to my second point, dancers are involved in daily rigorous practices just like any other athletes in a sport. A writer from the Press Democrat asserts that dance teams practice for more than 20 hours a week at times in order to perfect and synchronize their movement. It takes a lot of memorization, and you need to be a team, and like practice makes perfect. We also are instructed by a coach, and the coach pushes us just like it would of any other athlete. It takes a lot of repetition, and there's a lot of cleaning that needs to be done in order to get your skill to the right part. So my third point is that dancers participate in competitions just like any other sport. In competitions, there's many competitions around the world. They go from the regional level to national and international. A lot of you don't hear about them because it's only strictly in the dance world. You may know of the So You Think You Can Dance, which is also a dance competition that is widely publicized. According to multiple tests conducted at the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, dancers from Fox's So You Think You Can Dance were ranked among professional athletes in terms of overall athleticism. It was a great way to educate viewers and break the misconceived stereotype that dancers are not athletes. And even Gatorade has put dancers on their ads to show that they are athletes as well. In the competitions, we compete against other teams, and we are scored based on our skill and how well we know how to dance. And it's not something that anyone can go up on stage and just do. It takes a lot of work and athletic training and practice in order to perfect these skills. So it's time for people to give dancers the proper respect and say that dance is a sport. Thank you.
All right, Skye, I think you have a pretty good attention device that identifies what the subject is and why you see it as a controversy. You have a statement of the proposition sort of buried in the beginning of the section, and there's a nice definition that you give us. We don't really get a source for that definition. Then there's a layout of the secondary material, and so that sounds to me like we're getting a preview of what the body of the speech is going to be. And then we get about 2 minutes worth of discussion, background, setup, maybe an explanation about why there's controversy. I don't know, but it sure took a lot of time. And I'm listening to this going, well, wait a second, I didn't hear the secondary points that she set up being identified here. I don't know how this information connects to anything. And I was getting a little impatient, maybe, and frustrated at this point. And then 3 minutes and 40 seconds into the presentation, you finally come back to the proposition and say, so now let's talk about those particular points that I set up. I'm going, basically, we're almost 2/3 of the way through the speech, and you're still doing setup stuff. And that's, I think, too long. You need to get to your argument a little bit earlier. So you need to definitely edit down all of that transition material and that opening material and get to the argument a little bit more effectively. Like I said, at one point I was going, well, there's no organizational structure here. We just got all this information. And then like I said, in the last 2 minutes, you kind of come back to that structure and then start signposting. So that does help a little bit. When you get to those secondary points and start building your argument, there are a couple of problems. You have a tendency to ask questions. Why isn't this? Why doesn't this? Why don't people feel this particular way? But of course, that's not proof that advances your point. It just raises legitimate questions on the part of the audience without necessarily giving us the answer that you want us to come up with. The definition that you had early on of what constitutes a sport, I think you need to give us a source citation on that. You do give us the Olympic criteria, which I think is probably a good criteria to use also. And then you need to show us why those criteria are legitimate when it comes to defining what a sport is, and then proceed to show how dance meets those criteria in the supporting points that you present. I just got the feeling that that was inconsistent in the presentation. In the body of the speech, like I said, the last 2 minutes you are signposting the secondary points, so that helps a little bit. The evidence that you're citing here is problematic. I heard two particular source citations being presented. You had a quote on point number 2 that dealt with practice issues, and then you had this Gatorade testing that was referred to on the third point. Other than that, everything else are hypothetical examples. Like I said, the interrogatory being used as a form of proof, and I think that that's really problematic. You've got a personal example that you're using for that first point about sports injuries, for instance, and that's the only information. I'm sure that there's information about sports-related injuries classified into particular types. You say at one point that doctors treat them as if they're sports-related injuries, and I'm going, really? How do you know that? What's that based on? I just have your word for it. And I'm not saying that you're lying. I'm just saying you're asking me to believe something, and the only thing that I've got as proof is apparently your doctor treats your arthritis as a sports injury. So you're seeing a sports-related therapist for those kinds of things. That's a good personal example. Well, how many doctors have patients that see people who are have injuries related to dance? That ought to be pretty easy to illustrate. It seems to me like there's a whole world, like you said, of dancers where there's got to be somebody who's developing information on these subjects, whether it is in the particular kinds of fields of dance, like you said, jazz or tap or ballet or any of those kinds of things, that there are people who work in those fields who are teachers, trainers, therapists, and I'm not getting any experts being cited in those particular fields, and that seemed a little bit strange to me. So the main problem that I have with your argument isn't that there isn't a valid premise to some of the points that you're presenting, it's that you're not backing up those premises with the kind of evidence that would be a lot more convincing, where you're trying to convince us based on your own personal experience and credibility, and the description of hypothetical examples here, and I think that's a little underwhelming. All right, that's it. Thank you.